Catherine, why don't you start and let us understand how you wrote this book, the novel, The Sower of the Black Field.
Okay, very good. Well, for everyone who's here, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I am going to tell you a true story that comes from my family history, but it's so much more than that. As we're going to find out, it's really an amazing episode in the history of the Passionists. Now, the research and the writing of the story began 20 years ago, back in 2004, and I want to tell you a bit about that journey and how it contributed to the novel. And it's really appropriate that I'm doing this event with Father Rob Carbonneau because he's been a part of this journey from the very beginning. So, with that, let's get started. Okay, so since this is Veterans Day, it is appropriate to begin with the World War II veteran who discovered this story and contacted my family. If not for him, you wouldn't be here. Our plans would be different tonight. His name was Ed Pancoast. And during the war, he fought in Patton's Third Army. He arrived after D-Day and fought in the Battle of the Bulge. He was part of the peacekeeping forces that remained in Germany long after the war ended. And one of the places where he was stationed was this little Bavarian town called Schwarzenfeld. He befriended a few people in Schwarzenfeld during that time, especially a woman named Zita Mueller. And out of respect, they always avoided talking about the war because they knew it was a sensitive topic. But in 1997, Ed made a trip to Germany, and for the first time, he and Zita decided to talk about their wartime experiences. And it was on that occasion that Zita told Ed a story that completely amazed him. It was a story of an American Passionist named Father Victor Cook, who is my relative. And this American priest weathered the rise and fall of Nazi Germany behind enemy lines. And in the final days of the war, he saved the town of Schwarzenfeld from American troops. So Ed came back home to the States wanting to learn more about this priest who defended a German town from his own countrymen. I mean, that's really shocking. And he spent years trying to find our family. And it was actually through complete coincidence that he succeeded in finding us. And that was actually the very first time that we, the Cook family, had heard Father Victor's story. Father Victor himself came back to the States in 1947 after the war, and he never mentioned any of this to my family, not a word. And my mom and my dad and I had a chance to meet Ed in person in 2006, 3 years before he passed away. And you can see Ed in that lower picture on the far right, along with his wife Eunice. And in fact, the Father Rob was there. He was the one who took that photo. So now let's dive into the story. Okay, so who was Father Victor Cook and what was he doing in Germany to begin with? You can see him in that photo with the two Passionists. Father Victor is the one who's standing on the left. He was the eldest son born to the first members of my family who came from Germany to the States. And he was born in Sharon, Pennsylvania. It's about an hour north of Pittsburgh, about that. Sharon had a very large German immigrant community. So basically, that means he grew up German American. He was born on American shores and had American values and obviously spoke English, but he was also raised in an environment that was shaped by German culture and language. And he joined the Passionists when he was just 16 years old. And eventually, when the Passionists launched missions to foreign lands in the 1920s, he joined another priest, that's Father Valentine Leonard, and that's the priest that you see on the left, on the right there. Together, they established a new branch of the Passionist order in Germany and Austria. And you can see the three monasteries that they established over on the right. That's the monastery in Munich at the top. The one in the middle is Mariaschutz in Austria, and the one in the bottom is in Schwarzenfeld. And this ends up being Father Victor's story because unfortunately, Father Valentine Leonard dies of cancer in 1941.
So, Catherine, I
Mhm.
have a question for you. Uh, what was the impetus for the Passionists, Father Victor Cook and Valentine Leonard, to go to Germany in the first place in, I guess, the 1920s?
Yeah, that's a really great question because especially, I mean, you've done these presentations about China, and so in the 1920s, the Passionists and other religious orders, they were eager to send missionaries to places like China, which was ripe for conversion to Christianity. But Germany, on the other hand, I mean, it was already a Christian country, and both Victor and Valentine had to fight a lot of skepticism because of that. But you see, also in the early 20s, this is the aftermath of World War I, and Germany was suffering from the economic and the political chaos of that time. So I think that they felt like the Passionist message was really deeply needed there. And plus, they were both men who were born and raised in German immigrant communities. So I think that they felt a very deep affinity because of their heritage. So, okay, moving on. So, this map is important for a couple of reasons. I mean, first, it kind of helps to orient us with the geography. It shows us where these monasteries are located within Germany and Bavaria and in Austria. And it shows you where Schwarzenfeld is. That's the location of greatest importance to Father Victor's story. And you probably noticed that this map is a little different from what you would expect to see on Google Maps. And the reason why is because this is showing you the boundaries of Germany as it existed after World War One. But this map is important for another reason. I want you to take special note of monastery number 2, the one in Austria. Now, Victor's mission is to establish a branch of the Passionist order in Germany, and it really seems strange that there's one in Austria, doesn't it? I mean, there's historical reasons for that, but they're a little bit too complex for this discussion. But here's what you need to know. That monastery in Austria is pivotal. You might say, well, how pivotal? How important is it? Let me put it to you this way. If this hadn't happened, your plans would be different tonight. We would not be here. It's that important. So,
So you mentioned Father Victor Cook. People sometimes have a challenge to say how to pronounce his name. They say Coke or Cook, but you always go by Cook. But how is it that you, with Ed Pankos, you came into this documentation and how did this all start to come together now that we see the maps and the process that's emerging here?
yeah, that was a really huge challenge. I mean, I'm separated from Victor by, 4 generations. And so really the documentation ended up being so crucial. Because I mean, when you've got so much time between you, there's no family members alive that you can go to and ask, so what was he like, and tell me about his personality. So I found, in the research process, I found a couple of gems. And this is one of them. What we're looking at here, this is a video that was recorded by the Bauer family. Now, the Bauers are connected to us by Father Victor's sister being married to a member of the Bauer family. And so they were early adopters of home videos, even way back in the 1930s. And thanks to them, I have this video clip, and there's another one you'll see in just a moment. But I really love this one because you get a sense of who Father Victor was in the company of people that he knew and loved. He obviously loves telling a story. He loves having a really good belly laugh and just igniting the whole room in fits of laughter. And he loves speaking with his hands. And actually, I kind of find that funny because I like doing the same thing. It must run in the family. So you can tell in his clip, he really has a very vibrant personality. So, and another one that I'd like to share with you. This one, it's different, but it's extremely interesting. Now, this clip was recorded somewhere in the States. I'm not sure where. It might have been in Sharon, his hometown, or possibly in Pittsburgh, which is where the closest monastery would have been. So right away, you get this feeling of deference. There's this priest who runs out and removes his cap and then bows. And what that really demonstrates is how much respect he commanded on both sides of the ocean, both in Germany and in Austria.
So then this relationship then is a family relationship, and from there things started to unfold for you, and at a pretty rapid, but also at a very slow pace, and sometimes confusing. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah, it was. Yeah.
So why don't you start to explain that relationship and get us into the story then?
Yeah, so actually, just a note of interest to clarify like how I'm related to Victor. You see on the screen there, there's a man that's on the far right. That is actually my great grandfather. That is Father Victor's brother. So I am related to Victor through him. So that's Albert, my great grandfather. Albert had a son named Charles, who's my grandfather. Charles had Gary, who's my father, and then there's me. So that's how the relationship within the family, how it exists. So yeah, great question. So moving on. Okay, I love this photo. This is very, very different, but it shows a different side of his personality. I mean, the videos establish him as being very warm and cheerful and someone who had earned a lot of serious respect from the people who knew him. But when I try to interpret this photo, I fall back on the Germans who know him better than anyone. And the Germans they're delightfully literal in their way of speaking. And in the German documentation, they say that when Father Victor encounters some tough customers, some tough people, that he uses his full personality to deal with them. And I was like, full personality? What exactly does that mean? But when I look at this photo, I think I know exactly what they mean. So this photo was taken in Austria during a procession of some sort. I don't really know what the context is, and I have no idea what set him off, but look at that face. I mean, this is a man with a very strong backbone. He has a stern side. And history is going to throw him in a position where he has to deal with Nazis and stare down a furious American commander. Do I think that he can handle it? Yeah, I think he can. And if you read the Sower of Blackfield, there's a couple of occasions where I mention him pulling a bulldog glare. So what you're looking at, that's the historical reality. And for full disclosure, I did use AI to get a close up of his face so we could get a clear look at it, but I think it's pretty close though. So okay. Moving on. All right. So now let's narrow our focus to where Father Victor's story takes place in the 1930s and the 1940s. And that's this little Bavarian town of Schwarzenfeld. And you can see that the monastery that was so important, you can see that in that lower photo. Now, for some context, the monastery is built on this hilltop called the Meisberg. And you can see a steeple of a church right there. That church was built in 1720. That is the Miesbergkirche. And that's Miesberg Church in German. And the monastery that Father Victor built is this H-shaped structure behind it. That's the Miesberg Kloster. That's the Miesberg Monastery. So you might ask yourself, well, why Schwarzenfeld? Why was this place chosen as its location for a third monastery? And these pictures really do give you a sense of what that town was like during that time period. So, as you can tell, in the 1930s and 1940s, there's farm fields as far as the eye can see. You can tell that, especially in that one at the bottom, the pace of life, it's very slow, very calm, governed by the seasons, by the planting and by the harvest. And before he arrives in 1933, by this time, Father Victor has two monasteries. He has the one in Munich, and then he has the one that's in Austria. So when he needs a third monastery, he's looking for a place like this, some place where, it's very peaceful and quiet. And that's very helpful, especially in 1933 and 34, because this is the time when Hitler and the Nazis are starting to take control. So you want to avoid a place that has, a politically vulnerable climate. And there's another aspect of this place that is very, very notable, and that is the faith of the people in this town. Now, these photos were taken when we took our trip to Schwarzenfeld in 2005. And right away, you can tell a lot. There's this life-sized golden crucifix in the center of town. And if you go up to the Miesberg, that hilltop where the monastery is, they have this path called the Philosopher's Way. And if you walk that path, you'll find stations of the cross and a marble statue of the crucified Christ. That's the one that you see at the top there. And you'll also find a grotto that's dedicated to the Blessed Virgin. And Father Rob, something that you probably remember, and I think you've been there even more recently than I have. But remember all of the Epiphany blessings that were written on the doorways.
Yeah, when you go into the monasteries and when you go into a lot of the various towns there, they have these uh, chalk or lettered drawings. And explain what those are, because they're reverence for the understanding of Catholic identity and blessings for the town and all those dynamics of holiness and sacredness, because this is such a Catholic area, right, Catherine? Is that what's
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So to my understanding, yeah, the inscription is it's C plus M plus B, and that denotes the three magi who visited Christ after his birth, Caspar, Melchior, and Balthazar. And on the left of that, you have the century, so you'd see 20 right now, and on the right you have the year. So right now you would see 20 C plus M plus B 24. And what was amazing to me was it wasn't, you could see this not just in the monastery, but all over the town, and so what this really shows you, I mean, this is a town, even to the modern day, that is very steeped in devotions and ritual. And even I mean, what's interesting is in the 1930s, this town was noted for that quality, that spiritual character. And you can tell that in this quote that I put off to the side. So when Father Victor was looking for a location for this third monastery, and he was talked to a local official who knew all of these places where he was going and considering. And this quote really is worthy enough to share. This official told Father Victor, the other towns are less suited to offer as much peace and quiet, high estimation of attention, and attachment and loyalty to ensure the successful establishment of monastic life than Schwarzenfeld, with its devout Catholic population. And may I say that the population there is known to be politically calmer. And like I said, 1933, 34, that's exactly what you're looking for. But it was interesting to me that last observation was really notable. I remember we were there in 2005. We had asked, what was the ratio of like really devout Catholics to people who were basically considered themselves devout National Socialist. And they had said that for every four people, three of them were very devout Catholics. So that kind of gives you a sense that this is a very heavily Catholic town. I mean, that other presence is there. I mean, it is still a town in Nazi Germany, but it is largely a Catholic town of Catholic character. So moving on, when I came back from my trip in 2005, I was asking myself a very serious question. Why should I write this novel? And I imagine that if you're here, you're probably asking yourself a similar question. Why should I read this novel? Why is this going to be any different from any World War II books that I've already read? And yeah, and that really was, that was kind of a challenge because I knew that this was going to be a German home front story. And I also realized there's this very long accepted narrative that the Germans in the Third Reich, they're all Hitler's willing followers. They're all the bad people, the evil people. And here we have a case where we have an American saving a German town from Americans. Why would he do that? I mean, it really does kind of seem confusing, if you just think about it. And, is it just because he's, being a moral enforcer of the commandments, thou shalt not kill? Because to me, that's not enough, to justify writing this. And also, World War II it's a time period that is so fraught with pain. You see some of the worst atrocities known to humanity. And quite frankly, I felt very much that writing about that, pain was like walking on hallowed ground. It was a place that I felt like I had no right to tread because I had no context or no connection to it. So I knew that if the story of Father Victor and Schwarzenfeld was going to be written, it either had to illuminate what we already know in a different light, or it had to contribute something different. That was important. And well, folks, as you know, the novel exists, and I'm here to tell you this story is about a lot more than an American saving a German town from Americans. It is a German story. It is an American story. It's a Catholic story, but above all, it is a Passionist story. And it all starts with that monastery that Father Victor built in Schwarzenfeld. So check out that bottom photo. I really love this bottom photo. What we're seeing is a tectonic event in Schwarzenfeld's history. So, what's going on? So, this photo was taken during the groundbreaking ceremony in 1934 when construction begins on the Miesberg Kloster, the monastery in Schwarzenfeld. But just look at the faces of these people. Everybody is just electrified by anticipation. There's even this little girl who is a little tiny girl who's at the front of the crowd, and she's standing still and watching intently. I mean, how rare is it for a child to do that? So let me give you some perspective. This is 1933, 1934. These people are all living in the Great Depression. And what's worse, it's the Great Depression in Germany. As bad as it was in the States, it was way worse in Germany because this country is dealing with war reparations. So the economy is terrible. The unemployment rate is sky high. There are no jobs. There's no food on the table. Now, suddenly, Father Victor's arrived in Schwarzenfeld and he needs to build a monastery. And he hires everybody, every able-bodied laborer in Schwarzenfeld to do it. And so he's bringing jobs. And he has $200,000 in his bank account. Now, in 2024, $200,000, that doesn't sound, it's pretty modest. It doesn't sound like much. But here's the thing, you have to think in terms of how far the dollar went in 1933. So if you account for inflation and you also account for the exchange rate, in this time period, depending on when you get those dollars converted, he got maybe 3 or 4 Reichsmarks for every dollar. So, to give you some perspective, folks, he is dumping conservatively 14 million Reichsmarks on this little town. That is a lot of money. I mean, to these people, to Father Victor Cook is more popular than Taylor Swift. I mean, I mean, to them, it's a jaw-dropping amount of money. So take a look at that photo again. Why are these people excited? Because, I mean, yeah, there's faith, but it's more than that. They've got jobs, and as soon as that shovel breaks ground, the money is going to start flowing. And, they're about to be catapulted from poverty into plenty.
So, in this particular situation, then you have a local narrative of economics, you have a larger German narrative of economics and world economics.
Mhm.
But I think one of the challenges, I guess, that you, if I remember correctly, and certainly saw you in the research process, you're trying to put all these different German stories, world stories, and how to balance the narrative in a way that that brings everything constructively to light and to purpose. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. And what was really interesting to me is, I mean, you're looking at this local thing that's happening, but you also have to look at the context, the larger context of what is happening in Germany. So think about it. Right now, 1933, 1934, the German people are looking to Adolf Hitler to improve their economic circumstances. That's not what's happening in Schwarzenfeld. These people are seeing an American citizen that is making their lives better, not Hitler. And what was also amazing to me was when I was talking to people in 2005, they had this nickname for Father Victor. They called him the Provinci. It's a derivation of his title provincial. And what was interesting was it wasn't always the Provinci, it was our Provinci. And it reminded me of times when you watch World War II movies and you see these people who are like really devout National Socialists talking about our Führer. These to these people, he's our Provinci. There is a relationship there. There is a connection between followers and their leader. So that to me was interesting. And I'll tell you another thing that I found really interesting. You are looking at an amazing document here. So, why is this amazing? Let me give you some perspective. So, at this time, Hitler and the Nazis, they want full control over the German population. They do not want anything standing in the way of, the messaging between Germans and their Führer. And as a result, the Nazi regime starts attacking all organizations that can possibly interfere with their influence over the German population. So, what is one of those influences? Obviously, the Catholic Church. And the Nazis are severely limiting Catholic operations in Germany at this time. But there is one rule above all that really affects Father Victor and the Passionists. No foreigners are permitted to conduct pastoral duties for German citizens. So that means if you're going to preach or if you're going to hear confessions, you have to be a German citizen. It's the law. Otherwise, get out. That's basically what happens. So what happens to all these American Passionists who came over to help the German Foundation? They are gone. The Gestapo start hunting them down systematically and driving them out of Europe. And you would think, okay, and also the monastery, the first one in Munich, that one gets closed down in 1937. And the fate of the one in Schwarzenfeld, you'll find out in the novel. I'll just say that. And you would think, okay, well, Father Victor's an American citizen. His story ends here, but it doesn't. And why is that? He's declaring Austrian citizenship. That's what this document here, that's what that confirms. You might say Austrian citizenship. Okay, so why is that important? So remember that monastery in Austria that I told you was so pivotal? He claimed an address there just long enough to meet the requirement for Austrian citizenship. And you might remember this thing in 1938 called the Anschluss, where Germany annexed Austria. And in that process, anybody who had Austrian citizenship suddenly became a German citizen. So, bingo. If he has Austrian citizenship, he has German citizenship. What this document here says is he can stay. And so why is this document so amazing? It is allowing the very thing that the Nazis are so afraid of. It is providing legal permission for a foreigner, an American citizen, to remain in Schwarzenfeld and spread ideas that run counter to National Socialism. And he's empowered by a pulpit. So this is rare in the extreme. I can't emphasize enough how rare it is. So just think about the implications of that. So moving on, when I was, in Schwarzenfeld, and I was looking for, some evidence, I mean, what is Father Victor doing with this ability to stay behind enemy lines? What messages is he spreading? And I remember asking people, I mean, do you remember him saying anything notable? And they're like, it was 60 years ago. So I had to really rely on documentation to get some sort of hard evidence that he was trying to inculcate foreign ideas. And I found it in this document that we're looking at now. So, what is this? This is what's called a Posey album. And a Posey album is a scrapbook that German kids keep in childhood. It's kind of like this collection of verses and pictures and signatures that are contributed by friends. It's something you're going to keep and cherish all your life. And so, I mean, if you're inviting somebody to sign your Posey album, that is a big deal. And this Posey album here belonged to a woman named Liebharde Gindelay. The Gindelays were a very Catholic family. And it has a verse by Father Victor. So let me translate what is below his signature there. May the sufferings of our Lord Jesus Christ be ever in our hearts. Now, most people here know exactly what that is. That's the Passionist charism. So just in case we have a few people here who are, unfamiliar with the Passionists, just let me sum it up very quickly. Passionist ideology encourages followers to see Christ in all who suffer. You are challenged to feel the presence of God in the human condition and the sufferings and the sorrows that affect everybody equally. This is a profound message that directly counteracts prejudice and intolerance. It is all about, you know, peaceful tolerance. It's also about reconciliation. So imagine this in the context of Nazi Germany. This is mind blowing because, it's well, you're looking about you just think about what the rest of Germany is getting. They're being told you are members of the master race. The Schwarzenfelders are getting constant doses of Christ is present in all who suffer, including this Posey album. And here's the thing, a Posey album, there's nothing that is particularly religious about it. It's not a religious occasion. And yet here he is writing this message that basically, tries to encourage people to remember the sufferings of others. I mean, that to me, this is a case of something that's totally mundane, and it's evidence that he's dropping seeds of this ideology wherever he possibly can. So I was just thinking about all of these different factors, all of these facets, and what I realized is, why did I want to write this story? Why does it deserve to be told? What you have here is a an ideological disruptor who's in Nazi Germany. You have this, he's mega popular, he's legally permitted to preach, and he's injecting values into the local culture that run totally counter to National Socialism. Here's the thing. Schwarzenfeld is the only place in Germany that's getting this message. And what I realized is that is interesting. That is unique. This is a story we have not heard before. This is where the story is. And you might think, well, okay, I've heard the story now. I don't need to read the novel. Actually, this is where the novel begins. This is where it starts. It builds upon this context. So it's really about the exploration of how did passionist ideology and American values change this town. So this is where the story begins. And now we'll have a little bit of a spoiler on how it ends, but it's necessary to cover this because this is the part here. This is a narrative that captured Ed Pankost's attention. So, for anybody who's unfamiliar with this story, here's a really quick summary. So, through a series of fateful events around April 19th, 1945, a group of SS left a mass grave of Jewish prisoners on the borders of Schwarzenfeld. And the Americans arrived just 3 days later, and they stumble upon this grave. And what they see in their eyes is an atrocity of just horrific proportions. And they hold the town responsible. They figure, okay, this town, it must be full of Nazis. And the American commander, the one who's leading this unit, he is absolutely furious. And he issues this devastating ultimatum that has gone down in Schwarzenfeld's history. So the people of Schwarzenfeld are ordered to tend these victims in 24 hours, and if they fail, the Americans will execute German men in this town between 16 and 60. And the reason for that age range is because it covers anybody who would be a military combatant on the front lines and also a member of the expanded home front militia during that time. So to Schwarzenfeld's great fortune, Father Victor is here, and he musters every man, woman, and child to fulfill this ultimatum. And he confronts the Americans, his own countrymen, and he defends the Germans. But see, now we have the context to understand why. Because his presence through the war dramatically affected the town culture. He knows that most of the people here are not Nazis. That's my Alexa, if you can hear it. So in this picture, we're looking at a funeral ceremony that occurs on April 25th. And there's a really interesting story here. So take a look at those coffins. Note what's on top of them. There's like these green branches. Now, this is a Catholic ceremony. It's traditional to decorate a coffin with a cross, but we're burying Jews in a Catholic ceremony, so those crosses on the top are not appropriate. So if you look in the foreground there in that crowd, you're seeing there's a girl there in a plaid skirt and these braided pigtails. That is Zita Mueller. That is Ed Pancost's friend that told him this story. And she has an interesting story here. She noticed that these coffins were being laid out with no decoration, and she really thought that was sad. And so she gathered a band of children, and they went to some local fields and picked, a bunch of, greenery to decorate the coffins. And that little detail, that little story really does tell you a lot because here this girl and this whole town, I mean, they've been through this really traumatic, really horrific event where uh, their lives have been threatened, and this girl is worried about the decorations on these coffins. And that really does tell you that the climate here, it is quite different. It's a sign of, to me, a sign of concern and respect. It's that specific uh, mentality of, caring about something that crosses the boundaries. These are Jews and Catholics, I mean, there's a boundary here, and yet that boundary is being, overcome. And that is exactly what passionist ideology does. It encourages you to see, the connection through the human condition. And there's another story that I want to tell you about this, but we need another photo to get some context. So take a look at these men here. Now, this photo was taken in Schwarzenfeld by the U.S. Signal Corps, and it's right around the same time when all of this is going on. So, who are these men? I mean, if you take a look at them, it's obvious they've been through extreme suffering. You can see how their clothes are too voluminous for their bodies, and also their faces are very drawn. So, history records that 140 victims were killed in the atrocity on Schwarzenfeld's borders, but there were a few prisoners who did manage to escape, and you are looking at three of them. And I want you to just kind of study them for a moment and take a special note. There's the one in the middle. He appears to have a K in the L. The K is a little hard to see in this one, but he's got a K and an L painted into his shirt, and that's indicative of Konzentrationslager. That's a concentration camp in German. And there's this other man to his right that is in this dark coat and this gray pants. So hold that image in your mind, and then let's go back to this funeral. So, do you recognize the two guys who are in the middle of that photo? Those are two of these Jewish uh, people who escaped, and they're attending this ceremony. So you might ask, well, what are they doing here? And they were there to say Kaddish for the victims of the atrocity. And if you're not familiar with that, the Kaddish is a Jewish prayer that is recited during traditional prayer services, especially during funerals, and praise to God despite the loss. So now the exact circumstances of their involvement, they've long been lost to history. And clearly, the whole process of planning this funeral was chaotic in the extreme. I mean, it seems logical that they would have requested to be there, but their inclusion really does say something, doesn't it? And that makes this effectively a joint Catholic and Jewish ceremony, and welcoming their participation it's turning this event where the Americans are trying to make this a punishment, and they're turning it into an act of reconciliation by making sure that these people are included and their funeral rights are respected. So I think I interpret this as a sign of the acknowledgement of the dignity of life and the suffering that these people had been through. And, most importantly, it was an act of peace and reconciliation. And that is indicative of passionist ideology. So, What you have heard tonight is the foundation of the novel that I have written, The Sower of Blackfield. And thus far, it has been getting critical acclaim. It has earned 3 awards, including a gold medal for religious fiction in the 2024 Reader's Favorite Book Awards. And it's gotten 2 5-star book reviews and a Get It stamp of approval by Kirkus Reviews, which is very highly respected. So,
Catherine, the photos again accentuate just the intensity of the moment and the power of the moment and really the suffering of the moment. As we're coming to a close here, we're about 5 or 6 minutes before we open up for questions in this hour-long presentation. 2 questions. What was it that gave you the title for the novel? And is the novel a step-long process that goes right along with history, or it's historical fiction? So how'd you weave characters in history? So the name, and how did you decide on how you're going to weave the characters together if it's historical fiction?
yeah, actually, that was a it took a lot of time and thought to get that title. And while we're sitting here, I'll flip to this other screen here that shows you where you can get it. But to talk about the title of the novel, so I realized that the name of the town, Schwarzenfeld, means black field in English. And the reason why it's called that is because it's situated on the banks of a river called the Knob River. And the Knob River brings this rich black silt that the farmers depend upon to nourish their crops. And that's the reason why they named it Blackfield, was because of this silt. And so when I was writing, I was reflecting upon Christ's parable of the sower. As a preacher, Father Victor would have been a sower, quote unquote, a sower of the word, a sower of passionist ideology. And when you think about the parable, it draws all of these parallels between patches of soil that are receiving God's word and people, different types of people as they react to God's word. And so you have patches of barren soil where the birds devour the seeds immediately. You've got patches where you get a sprout, but it gets entangled and choked by thorns. And that to me was kind of indicative of what was happening in Nazi Germany at this time. You have a bunch of people who are, varying degrees of fervor with the Nazi message. But then you've got that final group of seeds that fall into very fertile soil and sprout and produce a harvest. And I realized that's a parallel with the people of Schwarzenfeld. They are the seeds that hear the word and sprout with a fertile harvest. And so I realized The Sower of Blackfield was exactly the title that I needed. So
And the characters, very briefly, and then we'll open it up for questions. You mentioned something on that, please.
yeah. Yeah, you were asking about like, how the novel compares to the history. I think that it's fair to say that the history it provided like the structure and the bones of the story. I realized there was actually very little that I needed to make up. All I really needed to do was provide some literary elements, to provide like the muscles and skin of the thing. So the characters, the theme, the description. And it was very important to me that you have this feeling of walking in the shoes of the Schwarzenfelders. I didn't want you to just register the facts. I wanted you to feel like you were living the history. And that's the reason why I wrote it the way that I did. So,
Okay.
some, yeah. So, does that
Well, I
answer
do.
your question?
Yes,
Okay.
it does. And I do remember having not arguments, but having discussions on whether you wanted to do this as history or a novel.
Hmm.
And you were very determined to do it as a novel, and it's been successful. So good for you. And the way it's put together is quite reflective and quite genuine, really. So let's offer this up now to questions here based on your presentation. Maybe some people have read the book and also just your comments. So we'll let Ryan Gold, who's on our staff here, field the questions. And Catherine, we have about 15 minutes before 8 o'clock on the East Coast. So let's see what we can do. And
Okay.
people are willing to ask questions, and we'll do precise and quick and concise as possible.
If you have questions, go ahead and use the chat feature at the bottom or use the raise hand feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll call on you one at a time to go ahead with your questions.
So, Catherine, while we're waiting, Ryan, do you have a question yet?
Nope, not yet. So go ahead.
So, Catherine,
Yeah.
well, what was the challenge that you had? You went to these archives, and what I noticed here is you had key documentation that was found,
Yes.
but also by going to Schwarzenfeld that one time, that gave the documentation and the humanity together to draw the energy to write the story, I believe.
Yes, it did. I mean, that week in Schwarzenfeld was magical. And really, I think most of the book was written during that time for me, just listening to what these people were telling me.
Okay, so it looks like we have a question now, Ryan. So let's go to the question.
Yeah, Linda, go ahead. Oh, Linda says she's unmuted, but we're not hearing her.
We're not muted.
Oh, there we go. Now we can hear you. Oh,
Sounds like a little hard to hear.
yeah.
We're at 100%.
Oh, there we go. Linda, we can hear you. If you're on speaker, I can hear one voice.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Okay, sorry about that. You talk about three monasteries that Father Cook founded in Germany. I assume there were Passionists in Germany prior to that. My grandfather immigrated to the United States in the early 1900s. He came here in about 1906, went back to Germany, married a lady. He was from Friedrichshafen, which was about 60 miles south of,
Wow.
huh?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Friedrichshafen, which
Continue.
is the whole Berger family's got big roots in Friedrichshafen, and he came in 1906, went back, married my grandmother, and immigrated and came to North Dakota. He knew Passionists before he came to North Dakota, so
Yeah,
I
I'll bet
assumed.
you.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
there were Passionists in Italy, and there may have been in a few other other European countries, but not in Germany specifically. Father Victor arrived in 1922 and established the Passionists there, but quite possibly he may have encountered Passionists that came from elsewhere.
Okay, so they would have been visiting him. They would not be Austrian or German Impressionists at the time in 1906 because he knew
Correct.
them, and that's why I'm sitting here tonight because my grandfather in Germany knew Passionists way back then.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Quite
Okay.
possibly, yeah. It may have been someone from a different country, but yeah. That's
Okay.
amazing. Excellent. Thank you for the question.
You're welcome.
We have a couple coming through on the chat. Ernest asks, besides personal anecdotes from the townspeople, are there any transcripts or documents regarding the discussions of Father Cook, a commander? Who was the American commander?
I wish there were. Yeah, everything that I had of that time was entirely anecdotal. And that was one of the areas when I was writing the book, I really kind of had to rely more on the fiction to try to figure out how to represent the drama of it. But yeah, I remember asking, the townspeople, do you remember what happened? Do you know, did Father Victor say anything? And I think that things during that time were just so chaotic that they were just so focused on what was happening and just worried about their lives at that time.
We did, if I remember correctly, I brought Catherine to the National Archives. We did
Yes,
get field command notes from the
that is
military
true.
operations at that
Mhm.
time, but they were tactical notes. They weren't They were just, we did this, we did that, and that we found the Signal Corps photos was quite a
Correct.
great aspect. But there was, in most tactical warfare notes, there's very little unless there's an extended report by the commanders on some specific things. So that's we did find tactical notes, but they were moving fast through this area. It was a very quick move of Patton's military.
Yeah, that is definitely true. We think we know who the commander is, but even we don't know for certain if that's him. So when I wrote that part of the book, I just referred to him as the commander, you know, for that reason.
So the next question is from Michael. It says, Patton's Third Army was fresh off liberating concentration camps prior to coming to Schwarzenfeld, so naturally they must have been reacting to that experience. What was the soldier's impression, Ed, who told you the story's impression, the story of the experience from the other side of the story?
So I think, Ed probably he that's a really, really good question. I'm trying to reflect on what his impressions were. Now, Ed himself he was not in the unit that experienced this, but I think that he was just so stunned that Father Victor would defend the Germans like this. And I mean, the Germans the Americans that came in there, these were very battle-hardened men. Actually, I believe that the units that came in there, this was their very first exposure to the Holocaust. They had never seen anything like this, and I think that's why they were enraged by it. But I think that by this time, that the awareness of other discoveries, like Auschwitz was discovered in January of 45 by the Russians. So I think that the awareness of this was starting to trickle through the ranks of the American army.
So the next question is regarding historical fiction, how and where did you draw the line between fiction and history, and what are the main narrative elements you added? Liked the book. Good job illustrating the charism.
Oh, thank you. Excellent. Yeah, that really was the biggest challenge. Now, I will say that I felt extremely lucky because the history by itself was just so engaging that for the most part, I could just kind of follow along, and all I had to do was just kind of add the emotion and the drama of the characters that were experiencing it. And the only place where I really kind of felt like I had to add Hollywood, and I think that's probably the spirit of the question that you're asking, were in cases where, like I was asking these eyewitnesses, well, do you remember what happened, here? Or do you remember like how this came about? And then those are areas where they're like, no, we really can't tell you. We don't remember. So I kind of had to fill in some areas and in fact, I have an epilogue in the book, Author in the Confessional, that kind of highlights where those seams are between the fact and the fiction. So you'll enjoy that. Yep.
Adrian says, I read this book over the summer and found it to be a very compelling story. You did an outstanding job. I was particularly impressed with the concept of, quote, the framework. What was the genesis of this concept?
I'll tell you this. Uh, Actually, I'll start with this. Father Victor, in a speech in 1947, they made him an honorary citizen, and he had this phrase. Um, I was just working within the framework that God set for me, and when I was trying to figure out, I mean, I like everybody else have asked myself, how can we have a good God in a universe, that also has evil? And I kept on referring to Father Victor's idea of the framework, and I realized that the way that he probably looked at this was like life being like a constant push and pull between God's will and free will. And that's what became the framework in the story.
I know we're getting to get pretty close here, and we can take those chats and maybe Catherine can get back in touch with people. I think just two announcements before we close, and One is that the town square is named for Father Victor Cook because of this.
Yes.
And uniquely, humbly, and amazingly, Catherine Cook and I are both honorary citizens of the town. And because of Father Victor Cook, the town of Schwarzenfeld. And the other aspect that I should let you know is on December 9th, there's going to be another lecture, and this one is going to be by Dr. Annie Huey of University of Dayton, and she's going to switch us back to the United States and talk about the column Woman to Woman that was published in Sign magazine on from 1933 to 1969. So the topic will be about American Catholic women during the that period, and that should be a very interesting topic for us as well. So, Catherine, perhaps what you can do is offer some closing thoughts. What did you enjoy about this presentation, and anything you'd like to say to our people who attended, and we thank them all.
Well, I'm just going to say that I'm just grateful that everybody decided to spend a few, like an hour with me talking about this book. And I got the joy out of writing it, I think, because I wanted to share something that really spoke to, the Passionist charism, because I really kind of feel like for me, this is one of the things that really kind of establishes my own faith. And I wanted to share that with people. And I wanted to show how the charism actually impacted this town in Germany. So that was a joy I got out of it.
Okay, Claire, if you would like, do you have maybe time for one question more, Brian? Two questions? Unmute yourself, Ryan.
I believe we're all caught up on the questions.
Okay. Then Claire, if you would like to close us as the coordinator here of this event, we'd be honored.
Thank you, Father Rob. Father Rob, Catherine, thank you so much for being with us tonight. We are very grateful. Very much look forward to reading more about Father Victor and his story, and about Schwarzenfeld and Blackfield. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it, and we will see you December 9th with Dr. Ann Huey and Woman to Woman. Thank you. Good night.